You wanted to make me look crazy? Take a good look in the mirror.
The thing about funerals is they bring out the worst in people. Standing there, in my cheap black suit, watching them lower Dad into the ground, I should have been thinking about his legacy or our shared memories. Instead, I was calculating how much this whole circus was costing and wondering if my brother Patrick would show up fashionably late, as usual. I didn't have to wonder long. A sleek BMW pulled up just as the pastor started his final prayer. Patrick stepped out wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. But that wasn't the knife twist. The knife twist was seeing who got out of the passenger side. Jessica Lane. My Jessica. Well, my ex-Jessica, but still. Some guys just finish first, Patrick said, sliding up beside me with that trademark smirk that made me want to rearrange his perfectly symmetrical face. Still working that office job? I shot back, keeping my voice low enough to avoid disturbing the other mourners. Patrick's grin widened. Regional manager now, actually. Company car, expense account, the works. He gestured toward Jessica, who was pretending to study the headstones with intense fascination. Funny how things work out. That's when my wife Melanie stepped out of our Honda Civic. I watched Patrick's face change as he recognized her. His mouth actually fell open a little. See, Melanie used to be his high school girlfriend before she went to college and forgot all about our little mill town. Before she came back and somehow ended up with me instead of the golden boy. Hello, Patrick, Melanie said, her voice carrying that professional HR tone she used when she wanted to establish dominance. I'm sorry for your loss, Melanie. Patrick's voice cracked slightly. You look... wow. I should have felt some satisfaction watching my successful brother stumble over his words in front of my wife. Instead, I noticed something else entirely. Jessica and Melanie were looking at each other with the kind of recognition that made my stomach clench. Not the polite acknowledgement of strangers, but something deeper, something that suggested they'd met before. The pastor finished his prayer. People started moving toward their cars, murmuring condolences and talking about the reception at the VFW hall. Louise Henderson, our elderly neighbor who treated gossip like a competitive sport, materialized beside me. Eli, honey, I'm so sorry about your father, she said, squeezing my arm with surprising strength. Such a good man. Always kept his yard nice, never caused any trouble. She paused, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Unlike some people, I see a lot more of your wife's car at night than yours these days. Before I could process what she meant, Melanie appeared at my elbow. We should head to the reception, she said. I promised Marcy I'd be there early to help set up. Marcy, Melanie's best friend and self-appointed social media influencer for our suburban neighborhood. If Marcy was involved, it meant whatever was happening would be documented and broadcast to anyone who'd listen. The VFW hall smelled like industrial coffee and industrial carpet. Folding tables covered with casserole dishes and sheet cakes formed a buffet line that would have made Dad laugh. He always said the best thing about dying would be not having to eat another tuna noodle casserole at a church function. I was standing by the coffee urn, watching Patrick work the room like he was running for mayor, when Marcy sidled up to me. She was wearing a black dress that was probably appropriate for a nightclub, but seemed excessive for a funeral reception. Eli, sweetie, how are you holding up? She asked, her voice dripping with the kind of sympathy that felt rehearsed. This must be so hard for you. I'm managing, I said. Good, good. You know, Melanie's been such a rock through all this, working so hard at the office, staying late to get everything done so she could be here for you today. Marcy's smile had a sharp edge to it. She and Simon Cross have been putting in some serious hours on that new project. Simon Cross. I knew the name from Melanie's work stories, project manager at her tech company. One of those guys who wore expensive watches and drove a Tesla and thought the world owed him something because he'd figured out how to manipulate spreadsheets. That's nice of him to help, I said carefully. Oh, he's very helpful, Marcy said. Very hands-on, if you know what I mean. I didn't know what she meant, but I was starting to get an idea, and I didn't like it. The reception dragged on for another hour. People told stories about Dad that made him sound like a saint instead of the stubborn, complicated man I'd actually known. Patrick gave a speech about family and legacy that had half the room in tears. Melanie played the perfect supportive wife, bringing me plates of food I didn't want, and introducing me to distant relatives I'd never see again. But I kept thinking about Louise's comment, about Marcy's knowing smile, about the look that had passed between Melanie and Jessica at the cemetery. By the time we got home, I was exhausted. The house felt too quiet after a day full of voices and condolences. Melanie disappeared upstairs to change clothes, claiming she had a headache from all the emotional stress. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my home office, staring at the security monitors that showed feeds from the cameras I had installed around our property. It was a perk of running a home security business. I always knew what was happening on my own turf. That's when I heard Melanie's phone buzzing from her gym bag in the hallway. She always kept 2 phones, one for work, one personal. But this was a third phone, one I'd never seen before. The screen lit up with a text message preview. "Can't stop thinking about this afternoon. When can we?" The message was from Simon Cross. I set down my bourbon and picked up the phone. No password protection. Either Melanie was getting sloppy or she wanted to get caught. The message thread told a story that made my blood run cold. Months of texts, photos, planning. Not just an affair, but something more calculated. They were discussing me, my habits, my schedule, my weaknesses. Melanie was feeding him information like she was conducting surveillance. One message from Simon particularly caught my attention. "Once we establish the pattern of erratic behavior, the rest should be easy. Restraining order, asset freeze, the whole playbook." Melanie's response: "He's already paranoid about money since his dad got sick. Won't be hard to push him over the edge." I sat there in my office, surrounded by security monitors and electronic equipment, reading about my own destruction being planned by the woman who'd promised to love and honor me. The woman who was upstairs right now, probably texting Simon about how the funeral went and whether I suspected anything. But here's the thing about running a security business. You learn to think like both the victim and the predator. You understand how people get caught off guard, and you also understand how to avoid getting caught yourself. I copied every message, every photo, every piece of evidence to a secure drive. Then I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and went upstairs. Melanie was already in bed, her back turned to me, breathing with the steady rhythm of someone pretending to sleep. "Long day," I said quietly. She murmured without turning over. I lay there in the dark, listening to her fake sleep, planning my next move. Patrick might have finished first when it came to Jessica. Simon might think he was finishing first when it came to Melanie. But I was just getting started. The rusty nail hadn't changed since high school. Same neon beer signs, same sticky floors, same collection of locals who treated the place like a second home. It was exactly the kind of establishment where a man could drink away his troubles without anyone asking too many questions. I'd been coming here regularly since discovering Melanie's secret phone 3 weeks ago. Not to drink away my troubles, but to gather intelligence. Amazing how much people talk when they think nobody important is listening. Chet Morrison was holding court at his usual spot at the end of the bar. Ex-military, currently unemployed, permanently bitter about the way the world had treated him since he'd come back from overseas. We'd known each other in high school, back when he was the star quarterback, and I was the kid who wrote sarcastic editorials for the school newspaper. "Eli!" he called out as I walked in. "How's the security business?" "Can't complain," I said, taking the stool next to him. "People always need protection from something." "Ain't that the truth?" Chet raised his beer bottle in a mock toast. "Speaking of protection, you might want to keep an eye on that wife of yours." My hand tightened around my own beer bottle. "What do you mean?" "Saw her at the gym the other day. Real cozy with some fancy boy in workout clothes that probably cost more than my rent." Chet's eyes had the gleam of someone who enjoyed delivering bad news. They were doing partner exercises, if you know what I mean. I knew what he meant. I also knew that Chet had been watching Melanie a little too closely for a little too long. But right now, his creepy obsession was working in my favor. "Guy drives a white Tesla," Chet continued. "Parks it right up front like he owns the place. Real pretty boy type. Probably uses more hair product than most women." Simon Cross. Had to be. The description matched the photos I'd seen on Melanie's secret phone. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. "But I trust my wife." Chet snorted. "Your funeral, man." Poor choice of words, considering I'd just buried my father. But Chet wasn't known for his sensitivity. I finished my beer and headed home, making a mental note to check out the gym situation. If Melanie and Simon were meeting in public, they were getting either careless or confident. Both worked in my favor. The next morning, Melanie announced she'd be working late again. "Big project deadline coming up," she said, not quite meeting my eyes as she packed her gym bag. "Might not be home until after 10. "No problem," I said. "I've got some equipment to install for a client anyway." The equipment was an AirTag that I planned to slip into Simon's gym bag. If they were meeting regularly, I wanted to know where and when. The gym was one of those upscale places that catered to young professionals who wanted to network while they worked out. All gleaming equipment and motivational posters and protein shake bars. Not my scene, but I'd done security consultations for similar places. I knew how to blend in. Simon was easy to spot. White Tesla in the parking lot, just like Chet had said. Inside, he was doing bicep curls in front of a mirror, admiring his own reflection with the kind of narcissistic intensity that made me want to introduce his face to a barbell. He was younger than me, maybe late 30s, with the kind of artificially perfect appearance that suggested regular salon visits and expensive skincare products. The type of guy who probably had opinions about wine pairings and thread counts. I waited until he went to the locker room, then made my move. His gym bag was sitting on a bench, unattended and unzipped. The AirTag slipped into a side pocket easily. Now I'd know everywhere he went. "Excuse me," a voice said behind me. "Are you using this bench?" I turned around to find a woman about my age, athletic build, short blonde hair, wearing the kind of workout clothes that suggested she actually used them for working out instead of posing. "All yours," I said. "Thanks. I'm Sarah, by the way. I don't think I've seen you here before." "Eli, just checking the place out. Friend recommended it." "Well, it's a good gym if you can ignore the peacocks," she said, glancing toward the mirror where Simon was still flexing. "Some guys treat this place like their personal photo shoot." I laughed despite myself. "Not your type?" "God, no, I prefer men who can change a tire without calling AAA." She started setting up for her workout. "What do you do, Eli?" "Home security. You?" "Physical therapy. I work with a lot of athletes, so I spend most of my day around people who actually use their muscles for something besides Instagram photos." We chatted for a few more minutes. Sarah seemed genuine, funny, down to earth. Everything Melanie used to be before she decided she was too good for our little town and the people in it. I was about to leave when Melanie walked in. She was wearing new workout clothes, expensive-looking ones that I definitely hadn't seen before. Her hair was styled in a way that suggested she'd spent more time getting ready for the gym than most people spent getting ready for work. She didn't see me at first. Her eyes were scanning the room, looking for someone specific. When she spotted Simon, her whole demeanor changed. Shoulders back, smile bright, walking with the kind of confidence that suggested she knew she looked good and expected everyone else to notice. Simon's face lit up when he saw her. He actually abandoned his reflection to meet her halfway across the gym floor. They hugged, a little too long, a little too close for people who were supposedly just work colleagues. "Friends of yours?" Sarah asked, following my gaze. "Something like that," I said. I watched them for another few minutes. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Touching each other during exercises, sharing water bottles, laughing at jokes that apparently only they found funny. If this was their idea of keeping a low profile, they were even dumber than I'd thought. "I should get going," I told Sarah. "Nice meeting you." "You too. Hope to see you around." I left the gym feeling better than I had in weeks. Not because of Sarah, though she'd been a pleasant surprise, but because I'd confirmed what I'd suspected. Melanie and Simon were getting careless. And careless people make mistakes. The AirTag worked perfectly. Over the next week, I tracked Simon's movements with the kind of precision that would have impressed my old journalism professors. Home to work, work to gym, gym to various restaurants and bars around town. And twice, he'd gone to the old paper mill on the outskirts of town. The mill had been abandoned for 15 years, ever since the company moved operations overseas. It was the kind of place teenagers went to drink beer and scare themselves with ghost stories, or the kind of place cheating spouses went when they wanted privacy. I drove out there on Thursday afternoon when I knew both Melanie and Simon would be at work. The building was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned industrial site. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. But someone had been there recently. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt, cigarette butts that hadn't been weathered by rain. Inside, I found evidence of regular visitors. A blanket spread out in one of the cleaner areas. Empty wine bottles. The kind of romantic setup that would have been sweet if it wasn't being used to destroy my marriage. I took photos of everything, added GPS coordinates, documented the whole scene like the crime scene it essentially was. Then I set up a small motion-activated camera in a spot where it wouldn't be noticed but would capture anyone who came and went. If Melanie and Simon wanted to play games, I'd make sure I knew all the rules. That night, Melanie came home with her hair slightly messed up and her clothes wrinkled. She claimed she'd been in back-to-back meetings all afternoon, but I'd tracked Simon's location. He'd been at the mill from 2 to 4 p.m. "How was work?" I asked over dinner. "Exhausting," she said, not looking up from her salad. "Simon's really pushing hard to get this project finished on schedule." Simon seems like a dedicated guy. He is. Very hands-on, very detail-oriented. She paused, as if realizing how that sounded. I mean, as a project manager, he likes to stay on top of things. I'll bet he does, I thought. After dinner, Melanie disappeared upstairs to take a shower. I checked her secret phone and found exactly what I'd expected. Messages from Simon talking about their afternoon meeting and how much he'd enjoyed their private discussion. But there was something else in the messages that made my blood run cold. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning something bigger. Simon had sent her a link to an article about emotional misuse and gaslighting, another link about restraining orders and asset protection, a third about how to document erratic behavior in a spouse. They were building a case against me, setting up a narrative where I was the unstable, potentially dangerous husband who needed to be removed from the picture for everyone's safety. The thing is, when you run a security business, you learn a lot about how people get framed. You also learn a lot about how to turn the tables. I spent the rest of the evening researching Simon Cross, social media profiles, employment history, public records. The guy was clean on paper, but everyone has secrets. I just needed to find his. The motion-activated camera at the mill had been busy. 3 visits in the past week, always on weekday afternoons when normal people were supposed to be at work. I'd watched the footage with the kind of clinical detachment that comes from years of analyzing security feeds, but seeing my wife with another man never gets easier, no matter how much evidence you've already collected. Today was different, though. Today I wasn't just watching. I'd tracked Simon's Tesla to the mill parking area using the AirTag. Melanie's car was already there, parked behind a cluster of overgrown bushes where it wouldn't be visible from the road. They thought they were being clever. I parked my Honda a quarter-mile away and walked through the woods, approaching the mill from the backside where the loading docks used to be. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching under my feet despite my efforts to move quietly. I felt like I was stalking prey, which I suppose I was. The sound of voices carried through the broken windows. Melanie's laugh, high and artificial, the way she laughed at her boss's jokes during company parties. Simon's voice, deeper, more confident than it had any right to be. I climbed the external fire escape to the second floor, where I'd have a clear view of their little love nest. The metal steps were rusted but solid. Below me, I could see them through the gaps in the floor. They were sitting on their romantic blanket, sharing a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Simon was wearing his usual gym clothes, the kind of athletic wear that suggested he worked out regularly but had never done actual physical labor. Melanie was in a dress I'd never seen before, something that looked expensive and impractical. "He's getting suspicious," Melanie was saying. "Asked me about working late yesterday." "So what if he is?" Simon's voice carried the kind of arrogance that comes from never having been punched in the face. "What's he going to do about it? Guy runs a 2-bit security business out of his basement. Probably makes less in a year than I spend on car payments." "Don't underestimate him," Melanie said. "He lies smarter than he looks, and he holds grudges. Against me. I'd like to see him try something. I've got lawyers, connections, resources. What's he got? A bunch of cameras and a chip on his shoulder?" That's when I decided I had heard enough. I made my way down to the main floor, moving through the shadows between the old machinery and support pillars. The mill had been designed for heavy industrial work, built to last. Even abandoned, it felt solid, permanent, the kind of place where a man could make a point without worrying about witnesses. "Afternoon, folks," I said, stepping into their little circle of light. Melanie screamed, actually screamed, like she'd seen a ghost. Simon jumped to his feet, knocking over the wine bottle and sending red liquid spreading across their romantic blanket. "Eli!" Melanie scrambled to her feet, her face cycling through surprise, fear, and anger in rapid succession. "What are you doing here?" "Enjoying the scenery," I said. "Nice place you've got here. Very private, very romantic, very exposed." Simon had recovered from his initial shock and was trying to project authority. "Look, man, I don't know what you think you saw, but I think I saw my wife having a picnic with her boyfriend in an abandoned building," I said. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is some kind of team-building exercise. Eli, please, Melanie said. Let me explain. Oh, I'd love to hear this explanation. Please, enlighten me. Simon stepped forward, puffing out his chest like a rooster defending his territory. You need to calm down, buddy. Nobody wants any trouble here. Buddy? I laughed. We're buddies now? That's interesting, considering you've been planning to have me served with a restraining order. The color drained from Simon's face. Melanie's mouth fell open. That's right, I continued. I know about your little research project. Emotional misuse, gaslighting, erratic behavior, very thorough work, almost professional. You've been spying on us, Melanie said, her voice rising. You've been reading my messages, following us. Spying? I interrupted. That's rich, coming from someone who's been documenting my daily routine like she's building a criminal case. Tell me, Mel, which one of my habits qualified as erratic behavior? The way I drink my coffee in the morning? How I organize my tools in the garage? Simon was looking between us like he was watching a tennis match, trying to figure out how much trouble he was actually in. This is crazy, he said finally. You're acting like a psycho, man. Maybe Melanie has a point about the restraining order. That's when I lost my temper. I'd been planning to keep this civilized, to confront them with evidence and logic and maybe a little shame. But hearing this smug pretty boy talk about restraining orders while standing in the ruins of an abandoned mill, surrounded by the debris of his affair with my wife, something snapped. I grabbed a handful of flour from an old bag that had been left behind by previous visitors, probably kids using it for some kind of prank, and threw it at Simon's face. White powder exploded across his perfectly styled hair and expensive workout clothes. Looks good on you, Casper, I said. Simon sputtered and wiped at his eyes, which only made the flour stick worse. He looked like a ghost, if ghosts wore designer athletic wear and too much cologne. You're insane, he yelled, lunging toward me. I sidestepped easily. Apparently all those hours at the gym hadn't taught him much about actual fighting, and watched him stumble into a puddle of stagnant water that had collected near a broken pipe. The splash soaked his shoes and the bottom of his pants. Careful there, champ, I said. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. Simon tried to get up, slipped, and went down again. This time he landed hard on his tailbone, sending up another splash of dirty water. He sat there in the puddle, covered in flour and mill water, looking like the world's most pathetic scarecrow. I knelt down beside him, close enough that he could smell the bourbon on my breath from lunch. Here's the thing, Simon, I said quietly. I know about the messages. I know about your little research project. I know about every lie you've told and every plan you've made. And if you ever come near my wife again, I'll start getting creative. Are we clear? Simon nodded frantically, water dripping from his hair. Good. I stood up and turned to Melanie, who was standing frozen by their ruined picnic. As for you, we'll finish this conversation at home. I walked away without looking back, leaving them to clean up their mess. Behind me, I could hear Simon cursing and Melanie trying to help him to his feet. The sound of their voices faded as I made my way back through the woods to my car. My hands were shaking as I drove home, but not from fear or anger, from satisfaction. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of the situation. That feeling lasted exactly until I walked into my house and found Melanie's divorce lawyer sitting at my kitchen table. Mr. Grant, the lawyer said, standing up and extending his hand. I'm David Patterson. I think we need to talk. David Patterson looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for expensive divorce lawyer. Silver hair, expensive suit, briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The kind of man who charged by the 6-minute increment and made his living destroying families. Your wife called me from the mill, Patterson said, settling back into my kitchen chair like he owned the place. She was quite upset about your encounter this afternoon. I'll bet she was, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee and not offering him any. Did she mention what she was doing at the mill in the first place? She mentioned that you've been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior, following her, reading her private communications, making threats. Patterson opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. She's concerned for her safety. I laughed. Actually laughed, which seemed to surprise him. Concerned for her safety? From me? That's rich. I sat down across from him, studying his face for tells. What exactly did she tell you about this afternoon? That you confronted her and Mr. Cross at their business meeting, became violent, and threatened both of them with physical harm. Business meeting? I repeated the words slowly. Is that what we're calling it now? Patterson's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something in his eyes, Doubt, maybe. Or just the recognition that his client's story had some holes in it. Mr. Grant, I'm going to be direct with you. Your wife wants a divorce. She's prepared to file papers alleging emotional misuse, stalking, and threatening behavior. She has documentation of your recent actions, witness statements, and evidence of your increasingly unstable mental state. What kind of evidence? Patterson consulted his notes. Surveillance equipment installed throughout your home without her knowledge or consent. GPS tracking devices, unauthorized access to her personal communications, a pattern of following her to various locations. I had to admit, it sounded bad when he put it like that. If you didn't know the context, if you didn't know about the affair, the secret phone, the plan to frame me as unstable, it painted a picture of a paranoid, controlling husband who'd gone off the deep end. That's an interesting interpretation, I said. Did she also mention that she's been having an affair? That she and Simon have been planning to set me up for months? That they've been meeting at that mill for weeks to plan my destruction? Patterson made a note in his file. Do you have proof of these allegations? I have photos, text messages, GPS tracking data, video surveillance. I have enough evidence to prove that my wife and her boyfriend have been planning to frame me for emotional misuse while they steal half my assets. Mr. Grant, even if your wife was having an affair, that doesn't justify stalking behavior or threats of violence. What threats of violence? I threw flour at the guy. Flour. If that's violence, then every food fight in history was assault with a deadly tool. Patterson closed his file and leaned back in his chair. Here's what's going to happen. Your wife is going to file for divorce tomorrow morning. She's going to request a temporary restraining order based on your behavior today. She's going to ask for temporary custody of all marital assets pending the outcome of the divorce proceedings. Temporary custody of assets, we don't have kids. Spousal support, then. Temporary residence in the marital home. Whatever you want to call it, she's going to ask the court to freeze your access to joint accounts and credit cards until this gets sorted out. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They'd planned this perfectly. Provoke me into a confrontation, document my erratic response, then use it to justify taking everything I'd worked for. And if I fight it, then we go to court, where a judge will hear testimony about your recent behavior. Your wife will testify about feeling threatened and unsafe. Mr. Cross will testify about being assaulted. The court will see evidence of your surveillance activities, your tracking devices, your pattern of following and harassing your wife. Patterson shrugged. How do you think that's going to go? He was right, and we both knew it. Even with evidence of the affair, even with proof that they'd been planning to frame me, I'd still look like the unstable, vengeful husband who'd gone too far. What does she want? I asked. 50% of all marital assets. The house. Alimony for 3 years while she gets back on her feet professionally. Patterson paused. She's willing to waive the restraining order if you agree to these terms and promise to stay away from Mr. Cross. Stay away from the man who's been sleeping with my wife. The man you assaulted this afternoon, yes. I sat there for a long moment, thinking through my options. I could fight it, but Patterson was right about how it would look in court. I could agree to their terms, but that meant letting them win after they planned my destruction for months. Or I could get creative. I need time to think about it, I said finally. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, we file the papers and let the court sort it out. Patterson packed up his briefcase and stood. For what it's worth, Mr. Grant, I've seen a lot of marriages end badly. This doesn't have to be one of them. Take the deal, move on with your life, find someone who actually wants to be married to you. After he left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the security monitors that showed empty rooms and quiet hallways. The house felt different now, like enemy territory. Every corner could be hiding a recording device. Every conversation could be used against me later. That's when I realized something important. I'd been playing defense this whole time, reacting to their moves, trying to protect what I had instead of taking what I wanted. It was time to change strategies. I pulled out my laptop and started researching David Patterson. If Melanie and Simon wanted to play legal games, I needed to understand the rules. More importantly, I needed to understand the players. What I found was interesting. Patterson had a reputation for aggressive tactics and creative interpretations of family law. He'd been sanctioned twice by the state bar for ethical violations. His ex-wife had filed a restraining order against him 3 years ago, claiming he'd used his legal knowledge to harass and intimidate her during their divorce. Even more interesting, Patterson's law firm was currently under investigation for client fund mismanagement. Nothing criminal, but enough to suggest that his practice wasn't as solid as his expensive suit suggested. I kept digging. Simon Cross's employment history, Melanie's work record, Patterson's client list. Everyone has secrets, and everyone makes mistakes. I just needed to find the right pressure points. By midnight, I had a plan. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't nice, but it was fair. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd show them what dirty actually looked like. But first, I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. Darren Walsh answered his phone on the fourth ring, sounding like I'd woken him up despite it being only 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Eli? Jesus, what time is it? Time to get up and make some money, I said. You still interested in that home security system we talked about? Darren worked with Simon at the tech company. More importantly, he hated Simon with the kind of passionate intensity that comes from being passed over for promotions while watching less qualified people advance based on politics and charm. Yeah, definitely. My place got broken into last month, remember? Insurance company's been a nightmare. I can be there in an hour. We'll get you set up with something that'll make your house safer than Fort Knox. What I didn't mention was that I'd also be asking him about Simon's work habits, his relationships with female colleagues, and any other information that might be useful in the coming war. Darren lived in a duplex on the wrong side of town, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions. His place was exactly what you'd expect from a bachelor in his 40s who spent more money on electronics than furniture. So what kind of system are we talking about? He asked, as I unloaded equipment from my van. Full coverage, motion sensors, door and window contacts, cameras with night vision, smartphone integration, the works. I started laying out components on his kitchen table. Should take about 3 hours to install everything. How much is this going to cost me? Let's call it a favor between friends. You help me understand some things about your workplace, I help you sleep better at night. Darren's eyes lit up. What kind of things? Simon Cross. What's his story? Simon? Darren laughed bitterly. Guy's a walking HR violation waiting to happen. Why? He's been spending time with my wife. I'm trying to figure out if it's just business or something more personal. Oh, it's personal. Simon doesn't know how to keep it professional with women. He's been through half the female staff at our company in the past 2 years. As I installed sensors and ran wiring, Darren told me about Simon's history. The inappropriate comments, the after-hours meetings with female colleagues, the way he used his position as project manager to pressure women into spending time with him outside of work. There was this one girl, Amanda, in accounting. Simon kept asking her out, wouldn't take no for an answer. Finally, she complained to HR. And you know what happened? Nothing. Simon's buddies with the VP of operations, Amanda ended up transferring to a different department. Anyone else complain about him? A few, but Simon's smart about it. He targets women who need his approval for projects, promotions, that kind of thing. Makes it hard for them to say no without risking their careers. I thought about Melanie's recent promotion to senior HR representative. The timing was interesting. What about the HR department? They know about Simon's behavior. They know, but they don't care. As long as nobody files a formal complaint, they pretend it's not happening. Easier than dealing with the politics. Who runs HR? Melanie Grant, your wife. Darren paused in his coffee making. Wait, you didn't know that? I knew Melanie worked in HR, but I hadn't realized she was running the department, which meant she wasn't just ignoring Simon's inappropriate behavior. She was actively covering it up. Tell me about the complaints against Simon, I said. Who made them? When? What happened afterwards? Darren gave me names, dates, details. By the time I finished installing his security system, I had a clear picture of Simon's pattern of behavior and Melanie's role in protecting him. One more thing, I said as I packed up my tools. You know anyone else who might be willing to talk about Simon? Off the record? Amanda might. She's still pissed about how the whole thing was handled. And there's this new girl, Jennifer, who just started in marketing. Simon's been circling her like a shark. I left Darren's place with more than I'd hoped for. Not just information about Simon, but a potential network of people who had their own reasons for wanting to see him brought down. My next stop was the Rusty Nail, where I found Chet holding court at his usual spot. It was barely noon, but he was already 3 beers deep and holding forth on the decline of American manufacturing to anyone who'd listen. Eli, he called out when he saw me. How's married life treating you? Could be better, I said, taking the stool next to him. Actually, I could use some help with something. Chet's eyes sharpened. Despite his drinking and his bitterness, he was still sharp when it mattered. What kind of help? The kind that requires discretion and a flexible schedule. I'm listening. I told him about Simon, about the affair, about the plan to frame me and take my assets. I didn't mention the legal threats or my own plans for revenge, just enough to get him interested. So, you want me to keep an eye on this pretty boy? I want you to document his activities. Where he goes, who he sees, what he does. Think of it as surveillance work. Surveillance work pays, right? $500 a week, cash, for as long as it takes. Chet's beer stopped halfway to his mouth. $500 was serious money for someone living on unemployment benefits and disability payments. What exactly am I looking for? Anything that doesn't match his story about being a devoted employee and upstanding citizen. This guy's got secrets, Chet. I just need you to find them. We shook hands on it. Chet might be a drunk and a loser, but he was also a former military intelligence specialist who knew how to watch people without being noticed. If Simon had secrets, Chet would find them. My final stop was Louise Henderson's house. My elderly neighbor was in her garden, tending to her roses with the kind of meticulous attention that came from having too much time and too few people to talk to. "Eli, dear," she called out when she saw me. "How are you holding up? I know this must be such a difficult time for you." "I'm managing, Mrs. Henderson. Actually, I was hoping I could ask you about something." Louise's eyes lit up. Nothing made her happier than being asked to share information about the neighborhood. "You mentioned at Dad's funeral that you'd been seeing Melanie's car at odd hours. Can you tell me more about that?" "Oh, yes. Very strange schedule she's been keeping. Leaving at all hours, coming home very late. And that's not the strangest part." "What's the strangest part?" "The man who's been visiting during the day. Drives a white car, very expensive looking. Comes by when you're not home, stays for an hour or two, then leaves." Louise leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I don't think it's appropriate. A married woman having male visitors when her husband isn't home." "Can you describe this man?" "Tall, dark hair, very well dressed. Handsome, I suppose, if you like that type. Always looking at himself in his car mirrors, fixing his hair." Louise sniffed disapprovingly. "Vain." "Simon. He'd been coming to my house, meeting with my wife in my own living room while I was out working to pay for the mortgage and utilities he was enjoying." "Mrs. Henderson, would you be willing to keep track of these visits? Maybe write down times, dates, license plate numbers?" "Of course, dear. I've actually been keeping a little notebook already, just in case." She produced a small spiral notebook from her gardening apron. "I believe in being prepared." Louise had been documenting Simon's visits for weeks. Times, dates, duration, even notes about what they were wearing and how they behaved when they thought nobody was watching. "This is very helpful," I said, flipping through her meticulous records. "Would you mind continuing to keep track? It might be important later." "Important for what?" "Let's just say I'm building a case." Louise's eyes gleamed with the excitement of someone who'd just been recruited into a real-life soap opera. "You can count on me, dear. I've always said that cheaters never prosper." By the time I got home, I had a network of allies and a growing pile of evidence. Darren would feed me information from inside Simon's workplace. Chet would document his activities outside of work. Louise would track his visits to my house. But the most important ally was someone I hadn't expected, Sarah from the gym. She was waiting by my front door when I pulled into the driveway, holding a manila envelope and looking uncomfortable. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said. "I got your address from the gym membership directory." "Not at all. What can I do for you?" "It's about what I can do for you. After we talked the other day, I started thinking about your wife and that guy Simon. I've seen them together before, and not just at the gym." She handed me the envelope. Inside were photographs, printed on regular copy paper, but clear enough to see faces and recognize locations. "I'm a runner," Sarah explained. "I run all over town, different routes every day. I started noticing them together in various places, restaurants, parking lots, that old mill outside of town. At first I thought it was just coincidence, but then I realized they were trying to avoid being seen." The photos told a story that would have been devastating in divorce court. Melanie and Simon holding hands in a restaurant across town, kissing in the parking lot behind the mall, embracing outside the mill. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Because I hate cheaters," Sarah said simply. "My ex-husband put me through heck with his affairs. I know what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you trusted." Thank you. This means more than you know. There's something else. I overheard them talking at the gym yesterday. They were discussing you, making plans. It sounded like they were trying to set you up for something. What kind of something? I'm not sure exactly, but they kept talking about documentation and evidence and making sure you looked unstable. Like they were building a legal case against you, which confirmed what I'd already suspected. But having an independent witness who could testify about their planning would be invaluable if this ended up in court. Sarah, would you be willing to testify about what you've seen and heard? Absolutely. Like I said, I hate cheaters. I went to bed that night feeling better than I had in weeks. Melanie and Simon thought they were playing chess while I was playing checkers. What they didn't realize was that I'd been playing a completely different game the whole time. Tomorrow, I'd start showing them the rules. Monday morning brought 2 pieces of mail that changed everything. The first was a formal notice from David Patterson's law firm, informing me that divorce proceedings had been initiated and that I had 30 days to respond. The second was a certified letter from Simon's company, notifying me that a restraining order had been filed on behalf of their employee and that any contact with him would result in criminal charges. I was reading both documents when Melanie came downstairs, dressed for work and carrying her gym bag. She looked nervous but determined, like someone who'd rehearsed a difficult conversation. "I see you got the papers," she said. "I did. Very thorough, very professional." I set the letters on the kitchen counter. Though I have to say, the restraining order seems excessive for someone who got flour thrown at him. "You threatened him, Eli. You physically assaulted him." "I threw flour at him. If that's assault, then every baker in America is a violent criminal." Melanie's jaw tightened. "This isn't a joke. You've been stalking me, reading my private messages, following me around town. That's not normal behavior." "You're right," I said. "It's not normal. You know what else isn't normal? Planning to frame your husband for emotional misuse while you're having an affair with your boss?" The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. You and Simon have been planning this for months. Document my erratic behavior, provoke me into doing something that looks unstable, then use it to justify taking half of everything I've worked for." I picked up my coffee mug, noting how my hand was perfectly steady. "It's actually pretty clever. If I hadn't found your secret phone, it might have worked." Melanie stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I could prove, how much damage I could do to her carefully constructed narrative. "Even if that were true," she said finally, "it doesn't change the fact that our marriage is over. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but we're getting divorced either way." "You're absolutely right," I said. "Our marriage is over, but you made one mistake in your planning." "What's that?" "You assumed I'd play defense, that I'd try to protect what I had instead of taking what I wanted." The phone rang before she could respond. Melanie glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "That's my office," she said. "I need to take this." She answered the phone, and I watched her face change as she listened to whoever was on the other end. Confusion, then concern, then something approaching panic. "What do you mean, suspended?" she said. "On what grounds?" I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I could guess. Darren had been busy over the weekend talking to Amanda from accounting and Jennifer from marketing. Both women had filed formal complaints with the State Labor Board about misconduct and a hostile work environment. They'd also provided detailed statements about how their complaints to HR had been ignored or buried. "I'll be right there," Melanie said, hanging up the phone. She turned to me, her face pale. "I have to go to work. There's some kind of investigation." "Good luck with that," I said. After she left, I called Chet to get his weekend report. Simon had been busy too, apparently. Friday night at a bar downtown buying drinks for a group of women who looked young enough to be college students. Saturday afternoon at the mall, following a teenage girl around until mall security asked him to leave. Sunday evening at a restaurant, having what looked like a heated argument with someone on the phone. "Guy's got problems," Chet said, "and he's sloppy about hiding them." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that involve young girls and bad judgment. I got photos if you want them." I wanted them. I also wanted the security footage from the mall, which I was able to obtain through a contact who worked for the company that monitored their cameras. Simon's behavior was exactly what you'd expect from a predator who thought he was untouchable, inappropriate, persistent, and well-documented. By noon, I had enough evidence to destroy Simon's career and reputation. But I wasn't done yet. I drove to the tech company where Melanie and Simon worked, a generic office park building that housed a dozen different businesses. The parking lot was full of expensive cars driven by people who made their living managing other people's work. I found Simon's Tesla in its usual spot, parked at an angle that took up 2 spaces, the kind of parking job that announced to the world that the driver thought he was more important than everyone else. I didn't damage his car. I didn't leave threatening notes or slash his tires. Instead, I did something much more effective. I put up flyers, simple black and white printouts, taped to every car in the parking lot. The headline read, "Misconduct Alert." Below that was Simon's photo, his name, his position at the company, and a detailed description of his pattern of harassment and inappropriate behavior toward female employees and customers. The flyers included quotes from his victims, dates and times of incidents, and a phone number for people to call if they'd had similar experiences. Everything was factual, everything was documented, and everything was perfectly legal. I was back in my van, watching from across the street, when employees started coming back from lunch. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. People gathered around the flyers, reading them, taking photos with their phones, sharing them on social media. Simon emerged from the building about 20 minutes later, probably called down by someone who'd seen the flyers. I watched him discover his new reputation, saw his face go white as he read the accusations against him. He started tearing down flyers, moving frantically from car to car, but there were too many, and people were already taking pictures. His perfect image was crumbling in real time, and everyone was watching. That's when Melanie appeared in the parking lot, probably looking for Simon. She saw him destroying flyers, saw the crowd of people watching and whispering, and I could see her putting the pieces together. She marched over to Simon, and even from across the street I could see they were having an argument. Melanie was gesturing angrily. Simon was defensive and panicked. Other employees were watching the drama unfold, some of them openly recording it with their phones. The argument escalated. Melanie slapped Simon across the face, hard enough that the sound carried across the parking lot. The crowd of onlookers gasped and cheered. Someone yelled, "World Star!" Security guards appeared and separated them, but the damage was done. By the time they got Simon and Melanie back inside the building, the entire incident had been captured by a dozen different phones and was probably already spreading across social media. I drove home feeling satisfied but not finished. The flyers were just the opening move. That evening, I got a call from David Patterson. "My client wants to meet," he said without preamble. "Tonight. She's prepared to discuss a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" "The kind where you both walk away from this marriage without destroying each other completely." We met at Patterson's office, a suite in a downtown building that was designed to intimidate people who couldn't afford lawyers like him. Melanie was already there when I arrived, sitting across from Patterson's desk, like a defendant waiting for sentencing. She looked terrible. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, her professional composure completely gone. The confident woman who'd been planning my destruction just that morning had been replaced by someone who looked desperate and cornered. "Eli," Patterson said as I took a seat, "thank you for coming. I think we can resolve this situation without anyone else getting hurt." "I'm not the one who got hurt today," I said, looking directly at Melanie. "How did the investigation go?" Melanie's face crumpled. "They suspended me pending a full review. Simon's been fired. The company's talking about criminal charges." "Criminal charges for what?" "Harassment, stalking, misuse of company resources." She wiped her eyes with a tissue. "They found out he was using company equipment to spy on female employees. Security cameras, computer access, phone records." I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Simon hadn't just been harassing women. He'd been using his position to stalk them, the kind of behavior that would get him arrested, not just fired. "Where does that leave us?" I asked Patterson. "My client is prepared to withdraw the divorce petition and the restraining order. She's also prepared to enter marriage counseling and work on rebuilding your relationship." I laughed. Actually laughed, which seemed to surprise both of them. Rebuild our relationship? After she spent months planning to frame me for emotional misuse while she was sleeping with a known harasser. "Eli, please," Melanie said, her voice breaking. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we can fix this." "No, we can't, and I don't want to." I stood up and walked to the window looking down at the street below. People were walking home from work, getting on with their normal lives, unaware of the drama playing out in the lawyer's office above them. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, turning back to face them. "Melanie is going to sign an uncontested divorce agreement. She gets nothing. No alimony, no assets, no claims on my business or property. In exchange, I don't release the evidence I have about her affair, her plan to frame me, or her role in covering up Simon's harassment of other women. That's not reasonable, Patterson said. She's entitled to half of all marital assets. She's entitled to what I'm willing to give her, which is nothing. We'll fight this in court, Melanie said, some of her old defiance returning. I'll tell them about your surveillance, your stalking, your threats. Go ahead. I'll tell them about your affair, your conspiracy to frame me, and your professional misconduct in covering up workplace harassment. We'll see which story the judge finds more compelling. The room went quiet. Patterson was reviewing his notes, probably calculating the odds of winning a court battle with the evidence I'd accumulated. Melanie was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. There's something else, I said. Simon's been arrested. Both of them stared at me. Arrested for what? Patterson asked. Stalking a minor. Apparently one of those college girls he was buying drinks for on Friday night was actually 16. Her father filed charges this afternoon. Melanie's face went white. That's impossible. It's very possible and very illegal. The police searched his apartment and found a collection of photos that suggest this wasn't his first time targeting underage girls. I sat back down, enjoying their shocked expressions. I'm sure the district attorney will be very interested in hearing about how his behavior was covered up by certain HR professionals. Patterson closed his file. I think we're done here. I think we are too, I said. Melanie signed the papers that night. No contest, no appeals, no claims on anything I'd worked for. She moved out the next morning, taking only her personal belongings and what was left of her dignity. I never saw Simon again. The local newspaper reported that he'd been sentenced to 18 months in prison and lifetime registration as a convicted offender. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, his future reduced to a series of legal restrictions and social isolation. As for Melanie, she left town entirely. Last I heard, she was working as a temp in some office across the state, trying to rebuild a career that had been destroyed by her own choices. I kept the house, the business, and, most importantly, my self-respect. Louise Henderson still waves to me from her garden every morning, and she still keeps detailed notes about everything that happens in the neighborhood. Chet found steady work doing security consulting for my business. Sarah and I have coffee sometimes, though nothing romantic has developed. Maybe someday. The mill is still abandoned, still attracting teenagers and urban explorers and people looking for privacy. But I never go there anymore. I don't need to. The ghosts of other people's mistakes don't interest me. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about how everything ended, if I regret destroying Melanie and Simon so completely. The answer is simple. They destroyed themselves. I just made sure everyone could see it. Some guys finish first by cheating, lying, and stepping on everyone around them. Others finish first by being smarter, more patient, and more thorough than their opponents. I prefer the second approach.